On this episode of the show, I have with me Amit Shivpooja. He is Director of Data Product and AI Enablement at Walmart, and we're going to be talking about synthetic data. We're going to dive in and talk a little bit about AI enablement, regulated, unregulated industries, and we will dive into synthetic data and get a better understanding of how it's filling gaps and how it helps, and some pros and cons, and a couple other things in there as well. But Amit, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for the opportunity, and excited to be here.
Absolutely. So typically, I ask people to tell us what the company does. In this case, Walmart. I'm sure everyone knows what Walmart does. We can save a couple seconds there and dive right on in. This is going to be a great episode because I haven't really covered synthetic data, and I think it's becoming very vital for more people to be aware. And let's kind of start at the top. So I know we're going to get to synthetic data, but obviously we're at a stage where a lot of people are. Well, they're past the getting into AI. They are doing something with AI. Now, what that something is and how far it's going is really and the success is really the question. I guess when you look at where we're at along the maturity curve of AI and you handle some AI enablement, talk to us a little bit about what some of the, obstacles are that you've seen for putting AI into production.
So that's actually a pretty interesting question because there are layers to that thing, right? I think the one that there's a lot of conversation on right now is the data itself, right? Do we actually have data that's of the caliber, quality, replicability that, would be a good input into the AI system? The other layer is primarily, are we using it for the right use cases? And do we really need AI? If we have a deterministic flow, do you really need AI or an agent to do that, right? Those kind of questions are becoming key or top of mind. The other one is inherently organizational culture. Given all the buzz and the hype and, all the things being written about AI and jobs and all of that, there is an inherent cultural collision that's happening where people are like, okay, should I do this? Should I not do this? If I do this, what will happen? Etc. Right? And I mean, that's something that can be addressed by bringing people along with the journey and being very transparent and being very crystal defined about the use cases up front. The last one is given the assumed capabilities sometimes of what AI can do. It has very high expectations. And when you do something in a small prototype world and it gives you an impact, one automatically assumes that it scales when the scaled world is a totally different, is multiple realities by itself. So it's not a simple flip of a switch and, it operates at scale. So it's these layers that are kind of instrumental for AI to succeed at scale. And that entire transformation and that entire journey is what all of us as leaders are trying to navigate today.
Absolutely. I love that. And I guess, when we're talking about AI, all roads come back to business fundamentals and data. I feel like that's where every conversation leads. And you had a great analogy of satellites and launch pads. I thought I'd let you explain it to everyone.
Sure. So I kept running into discussions, even outside of Walmart and the like, where people are like, oh, I want to do this with AI and I want to do that with AI. And, I'm all for that. And none of us wants to slow down innovation or slow down an organization. But if we take AI as kind of being the business of launching satellites into space, you need a robust launch pad, the support ecosystem that provides the fuel and all of that, the entire launching ecosystem. To me, that's the data ecosystem. You want something that's replicable. You want something that you trust. You want something that you're able to look into and say, hey, okay, this is what it is. And this is why something happened. You're able to trace things back and the like. So the statement I keep making is that it's incumbent on us today as data leaders to build that robust launchpad and data ecosystem, so that tomorrow, whether it's launching a sounding rocket to see what's happening in the ionosphere, or you want to put a 1-ton satellite up in space, you have the robust ecosystem in space. And then, the flexibility and the tool nature of AI just builds off that.
Absolutely. I think I've asked this question for to different guests, and yeah, I know a lot is said about tech debt. We don't talk a whole lot about data debt. Doesn't get as much airtime. I think it's because it's not quite as easy to deal with. Paying that debt down is very complex and complicated for most. I guess when it comes to AI and looking at that data debt, that certainly has to factor into the equation. But should that be should that actually be a limitation or like a stumbling block if you see an opportunity to take advantage of the technology, or is it one of those where depending on the debt just might be too much?
So I'm optimistic in this thing that we don't have that much data debt that we can't overcome it. But I will say that I've always said that data has always been the stepchild in an organization until recently. Data was always used terms like digital exhaust and things like that, right? What's happening before was us as data leaders would push for data to be governed and quality and supported and invested and all of that. But now we have AI pulling it for us, right? So AI comes along and says, "Hey, we need quality data. How will you make that happen?" So it's in some ways a welcome enabler. Having said that, to come back to your question, the data debt is definitely there, right? But we can be extremely smart about it, even given what AI can do. So, for example, we are looking at ways of, or I'm looking at ways of how I can use AI to solve the data problem for AI tomorrow. So, many companies have, for example, robust metadata, right? They've captured it, they've invested the time, they've documented it, it's in data catalogs or in robust locations. But is it AI ready? Right. So what I mean by that is AI ready is that if I fed that metadata to an LLM today, will it get the maximum value and context and all out of it? Right. So even a simple use case like using an LLM to actually make existing metadata AI ready is a powerful example of thing that we can use to get past any backlogs or limitations that we have. So I'm pretty excited about what we can do. It's now a question of investing in it and doing it.
I like that. And I guess, this conversation, talking about, some obviously the different industries and different obstacles they have. And I know one of the things you mentioned to me that becomes very interesting is when we look at regulated and unregulated industries. And I think that kind of ties in a little to the data debt. Can you kind of maybe dive into that for us a little?
Yeah. So just to set context, where this is coming from is my dad's an aeronautical engineer. And we keep discussing, the happenings in the world. And this topic came up where I was kind of contrasting, some of the challenges we're having around legacy data sets and all that. And he actually, in the aerospace industry, everything is so well defined and it goes through so many checks and balances and, processes and documentation standards and all of that they very rarely end up with the kind of data debt we do. What I mean by that is because they have to, it's very clear upfront what the output should look like or how it should be presented, what the definitions of items should be, what are the acceptable value ranges for, data columns or data sets and the like. They're very quickly able to action on the data, revisit data, submit data for certification or or clearance and things like that. And so the regulatedness of an industry actually presents an interesting opportunity or even sets a kind of a pretty robust foundation along the lines of, the launchpad analogy I was using, which actually helps those industries actually move a little faster when it comes to having data that's AI ready, because they're already following some standards, they've already got things structured in a way. It's a question of interpreting that structure and sticking to that structure like a muscle or a discipline going forward. So I found that a really fascinating instance of how a regulated industry has something of a pro over an unregulated industry.
That's really interesting because I've heard that a couple of times now from some guests, and it makes you start thinking about if you are in an unregulated industry and you don't have those those firm guidelines to follow. You can create your own set of standards. Obviously, it's a little bit harder, to do than for me to just say, "Hey, create the standards," and people are like, "Well, we haven't." I guess when you look at some of this core of AI enablement, and obviously your data is at the core of what we're talking about. We talked about data debt. We talked about regulated, unregulated. When it does come to AI enablement, data is, you do need to train your models. You do need to have data that's accessible. The data issues are there. And I guess this kind of ties into the discussion around synthetic data. Mm-hmm. And just in case somebody is not familiar with synthetic data, I'm sure everyone is, but just to make sure, can you just tell us what synthetic data is before we have you dive in further?
Sure. So my definition of synthetic data is when we, in the absence of suitable data, either in terms of diversity or volume or certain types of data, it's where we create a data set or simulate a data set with statistical or non-statistical tools in order to give us that final usable data product that we can use to do our analysis or enable AI systems and the like. So that's my quick, simple definition for synthetic data.
Absolutely. And I guess when it comes to AI and projects that require data, obviously you could have issues with data. Where does synthetic data actually come into play? At what point are we turning to synthetic data, and why would we do that?
That's another interesting question, because I can think of a couple of different perspectives where this would come into play. One is, for some time now, we've been hearing that data can be a moat. What I mean is, certain companies like the Googles, the Walmarts and all have tons of data, right? And that can be a real competitive advantage. But let's say there's a startup out there. A startup won't have access to the same amount of data that we do or, big organizations do. So their synthetic data is an interesting option because, you could potentially create a voluminous data set that could help out, right? So that's scenario one that synthetic data could help with. Scenario two is that even in established or large organizations, depending on the product or the service, there is a chance that the data tends to funnel itself towards that thing, right? Like, so for example, if I have a subscription service, I'm inherently creating a bias or a direction for the data, right? But now let's say I want to try, hey, it's a subscription service, plus I want to be able to sell titles by themselves or something like that. You may not have data. So then synthetic data is an interesting way for you to expand on this data set to simulate what that behavior could be in the, what that data could look like or those patterns could look like in the data, and create that ecosystem for the analysis or for AI to work. The third scenario is that I want to create a kind of like I want to create kind of like a testing or like a baseline data set, what an ideal data set would look like. And that could be a way to kind of create a synthetic data set for more diagnostic and for more analytical purposes to kind of see, hey, where does reality fit against a baseline? And the same, because you don't know, where the differences are, etc. So whenever there is a gap, there are some interesting ways synthetic data can be brought in. However, what I would caution against is leaning only on synthetic data, because it is not representative enough. An ideal scenario would be a combination of synthetic and real world data.
Absolutely. And I guess as we're kind of looking at, some of the factors of AI and some of the concerns around privacy, some of the issues that we are worried about, that quality of that data. You mentioned a couple of aspects around privacy and actually the diversity in that could be used in the training data. If you love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So let's say that, one of the biggest things for AI and especially data for AI is bias or existing patterns that exist in the data itself. Now, if I'm doing a system that is supposed to be neutral to certain factors, then how do you, one method is to force or undervalue or reduce the weightage of certain criteria, right? However, in some cases you can't do that. So in other cases, what you want to do is you want to simulate the thing. So for example, if my data set has predominantly male profiles in it and not as many female profiles in it or other gender profiles in it, synthetic data may be a way for us to create those additional profiles to an equivalent representative volume so that the data set's original nature doesn't skew you one way. But the other thing that can also do is that in the event that we are dealing with PII or we are dealing with that kind of information, if we don't want that directly attributable to an individual or a set of individuals, we can use synthetic data to expand on the data set to create a bigger ecosystem. And that way, it kind of, overlays and, captures the actual data within it somewhere, which, is not necessarily needed for everybody to know. Right? So there's that kernel of original data with the synthetic data on top of it. So it helps protect privacy and all of that stuff, but still giving enough volume and diversity of the thing that would meet use cases.
Absolutely. I guess when we're looking at synthetic data and you're evaluating the right use cases that you should select to go down that path, are there any things you've seen that make it a better use case, a better candidate versus saying, hey, you know what, we just don't have the data or we just have to rely on the data we have? I mean, what are some of the pros and cons of taking that path?
So one of the yardsticks one can use in this situation is explainability, right? Like if, for example, one wants to explore and one wants to find patterns and all that, then synthetic data is a little more acceptable. But if you have an operational system that's making a decision or it's giving, let's say, a classification like yes or no, or, give this person a loan or not, when that traceability is required to say, hey, how did he come up with that answer? You cannot have it reliant only on synthetic data, because then that's a red flag, because then you can't explain on how you got that output, right? So that's one of the key yardsticks. So another way of, to answer your question is basically to say, if we want to explore, if we want to stress test, if we want to prototype, I think synthetic data is a great asset to have. But when it comes to the real world actual production, deployment, and implementation, nothing beats real world data. So what one can do is actually figure out a process or a timeline based structure where we actually have milestones where we transition away from the synthetic data to the real world data as we get it. Right? So for example, maybe in the alpha version of the solution, it's it's mostly synthetic data. But then by the time we get to the beta version or, that version, we've got a lot more real world use cases and real world data that starts to exceed in weightage than the synthetic data. And then eventually, as you get closer to production, you should hopefully be able to turn on the switch for actual real world data being the powering factor for the same.
Absolutely. I love that. I guess, a question to maybe go back and tie this in. When you're looking at AI strategy, obviously I know you got to identify the right business problem. You got to know what you're trying to accomplish. When you are upfront, speaking to stakeholders, at what point do you start thinking about some of these details? And the reason I ask is, I joke, half joke, half truth is, every technologist I know starts thinking about the solution mid-cycle in the conversation with the stakeholder. And it's interesting because maybe with other technologies, I could see that being something. But when it comes to AI and it's heavy business process dependent, even more than just building a custom application, we might be changing somebody's entire workflow potentially. When do you start thinking about some of these other technology things that you and I have talked about? What's that divide look like? Do you want to include it up front? Do you need to? Should you not worry about it until later? I mean, what does that look like to you?
So this is actually interesting because recently I've been talking a lot about the importance of data and AI literacy, right? And I wanted to kind of touch a little bit on the data literacy piece here. Uh, and what I mean by that is that I think we should think about the data as early as you can in the decision making process, but for that, people have to be literate. Meaning, a product manager for a particular area should have some sense of what data they have. Right? I'm not saying they should be an expert and know every column and every this thing, but they should at least know that, oh, I can go to these sources, I can go to this catalog, and here is my team that can help me with it, etc. Now, one good milestone is when we're putting our product requirements together or our feature requirements, or we have defined the problem that we have solved. That's a good point to not only explore what the current systems are, but what the current data ecosystem is in the organization or in the entity. Right? A lot of things can be mitigated if we have that clarity up front, and that's why if you see, I believe a lot of the data product conversations are getting traction today. So that's also a good time to even figure out, hey, do we need synthetic data, and so that we can plan for it, right? Because a quick check at that time, oh, we only have 10 million rows of 10 million rows of data. Maybe we need more, right? So maybe we should plan in our product plan or project plan a synthetic data enablement component or data procurement. Maybe you can go buy third-party data. As well, right? So that's, I think, a really powerful milestone, which is we are in the product, we are finalizing our requirements. We know exactly what problem we have identified. It could change, but we've identified for now. Now let's look at the tech landscape, the data landscape, etc., in order to take things forward.
Absolutely. I think that's actually fantastic advice. And just generally speaking, actually rolling it back up to your purview with data product and AI enablement. Obviously, we can take a look at some of the top things that we should look at. But I guess when you look at AI enablement and you look at even the earliest discussion you have just with stakeholders around expectations of what AI can do, this is one of the few times where people actually, are asking for things by name. No one ever went, oh, go use that Tableau and, get me this report. I mean, they didn't care. They just wanted the report of the dashboard. In this case, people are like, oh, what could AI do for me? And you said that expectation is tricky. I guess when you look at it, from that top level, what do those conversations look like? How are you phrasing them?
So I found a couple of lenses to be useful in this particular situation. One is to get an understanding of what the actual problem is that they're thinking of, or what is it that they're trying to focus on. Some people will say, hey, can I get an AI to forecast my, sales behavior, for example? But the question is not forecasting the sales behavior. It's why they want the forecasted sales behavior. Do they want to plan something? Do they want to mitigate risk? Do they want more time to action on something or notify a vendor or a supplier? Whatever that is, to get clarity on that is really valuable. The second one is what's the business impact and what's the business value? Okay, let's say we do all of this stuff, right? What does that mean for the organization? Is it going to save money? Is it going to earn money? Or is it going to mitigate risk, right? It comes down to those three, right? For the same. So then it's a question of identifying that, right? Because we have so many problems and so many things we want to do, and we have only so much capacity and so much this thing that you want to kind of channel and focus on the right problem. Now, if you have all of these, the next thing to look at is what the possible solutions are, right? Is it like, hey, this could be just a quick, simple, like you said, a dashboard that they just want to read and they're happy with, right? Or instead of a dashboard, it's an email that comes out every Monday morning with the data that they want. So do you really need an AI system for it, right? So, that kind of solutioning and optioning is kind of, and even maybe prototyping will kind of help land what the actual end solution is. And what I found is that not every situation is an AI solution situation, right? I think a lot of people are like, I have a hammer, where's the nail? And it's incumbent on us as data leaders to say, hey, is that really a nail? Or do it's a screw, so you need a screwdriver or a spanner for this nut and bolt. So that's, I think, the conversation for it.
I love it, man. Fantastic conversation, Zamit. I appreciate your time. I mean, we covered a lot of different things, a lot of ground. If somebody has a follow-up question, what is a good way of getting in touch?
So two things. One, LinkedIn's my only social media, so that's a good way to get me. So Amit Shivpooja, you'll find me on LinkedIn. The other is my website, which is daicompass.com, which is data and AI compass.com. So daicompass.com. That's a good place to get access to my LinkedIn profile, my book, which is the Data and AI Compass, and the Data Compass Substack that I maintain, where I post all my thought pieces. So those are the two ways to get in touch with me.
Love it, man. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on and sharing with us.
Thank you again.
All right. That's it for the episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think it was a great conversation around synthetic data. I hadn't done a show about it, and it seemed is an expert in the space, and thought it'd be great to kind of highlight it. And he went through and talked to us a little bit about the pros and cons, situations to use it, situations not to use it. We talked a little bit about AI enablement and just stakeholder and strategy as well. So please share this episode with somebody who might enjoy it and benefit from it. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.